Now, let us say a very good morning to Dan Hodges from the Mail on Sunday, a man I haven't spoken to since we did the head-to-head, actually, with Peter Hitchens. Dan, very good morning to you.
Morning to you.
Looks as though you finally beat Peter Hitchens into submission, it would seem.
Absolutely. I think it was obviously after our debate that Peter finally realised he had to fold his cards and depart the field gracefully.
Isn't it ridiculous how much sort of abuse has been aimed at him, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't understand that. I tweeted about this a couple of days ago. I mean, obviously Peter and I disagreed fundamentally on many of the issues relating to COVID, but one thing that I would say is that there wasn't at any point where Peter was what I would call an anti-vaxxer. I mean,
not at all.
Never articulated a case that people shouldn't have the vaccine. I mean, he did question whether or not the vaccine was, been approved to be a game changer. I mean, I would argue it is, and it is proving to be. He a different view, but the idea that and he was completely open. He said he had the vaccine because he believes there are going to be vaccine passports introduced for international travel, and wanted to have the ability to travel to see members of his family, which seems to me a perfectly rational position, and a position perfectly consistent with the positions he'd adopted throughout this the course of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely right. And equally, for those people who say they object to being told to have the vaccine, to suddenly turn into people who don't like other people having it, is rather ironic, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, I think it is indicative of the nature of some of those who were sort of aligned themselves with Peter and Peter's arguments, or maybe Peter aligned himself with them and their arguments. I mean, I did say during our debate, and have said consistently, that I thought there was an element of denial in terms of what some of what I call the lockdown deniers, the positions they were adopting. And I think there's an element of this in the attacks on Peter. I mean, you can criticise Peter Hitchens for a lot of things, but you can't criticise him, in my view, for not being a staunch opponent of lockdown and the government's lockdown strategy. But that doesn't seem to be enough for some of his the more zealous anti-lockdown advocates.
Yeah, although you did accuse him of one or two things during that debate which he hadn't actually said. For example, you kind of aligned him up with people who had said that there was some kind of conspiracy around Boris Johnson, and he kept asking you not to use the phrase COVID denier, and you kept using it, rather like Boris does about the Scottish nationalists.
Well, I kept using the phrase lockdown denier, and I'll keep using the phrase lockdown denier in relation to the conspiracy theories. What I was simply saying to Peter was that Peter was putting forward an argument that there was some. It was possible to question the figures in relation to deaths, the figures in relation to infections, the figures in relation to hospitalizations here, but not just here, but around the world. And I was merely pointing out, if you want to question the validity of the figures we're being given here, you then, to believe that is then being replicated around the world, you have to believe that's part of a grand conspiracy theory.
Well, I'm not going to speak for him, because I would certainly never be as bold as to do that. But as far as where we are now, Dan, I mean, you said on that debate that the lockdown was clearly working. I mean, the fact, I suppose, that the NHS has now been dropped down from level 5 to level 4, it's no longer in danger of being overwhelmed, would suggest that your lockdown argument is right. But now, the reason why we're in a better place than we were ever before is because of the vaccine, not because of the lockdown, right?
Well, I think it's a combination of two. I mean, the argument about lockdown, obviously, it was always important to have the lockdown to buy the space and the time to enable people to get vaccinated, to save lives while people were vaccinated, and then to be able to unlock in a sustainable way. As I said, that in relation, this is where Peter and I did differ on the vaccine. Peter was very clear. He said he didn't think the vaccine, or didn't think there was evidence the vaccine was a game changer. I mean, there's clear evidence the vaccine is going to be a game changer. I mean, I think the question now is, we're now getting to the point where the vaccine is proving so successful that the debate is going to shift to whether or not we have to stick to the very rigid timetable for unlocking that Boris set out earlier. Well, it's last month now, isn't it? So
I think he's going to be under a lot of pressure to move up that particular program, because I think as we get through this month, and as the numbers fall even further, if we're now down to single figures of people over 80 becoming getting put into ICUs, and that starts to dwindle down to hardly anything at all, they're going to be under, I think, a lot more pressure, aren't they, to open up things earlier?
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, I think if we get to the situation where, as soon as we get to the point where the figures are significantly below where they were before we approached, if you like, the circuit breaker lockdown, the second lockdown, November lockdown. Once we get significantly below that point, once the figures drop, I don't know, below, a couple of thousand cases a day, once it's quite clear that there is now vast extra additional capacity within the health service compared to what we saw at the peak, and once we see and have evidence that the vaccination program is continuing as effectively as it is, I think you're right. I think that the pressure, I actually think the pressure will be irresistible. I don't think it will be politically sustainable at that point for Boris to hold the line all the way through the summer.
And on that brings us nicely to Rishi Sunak and the budget tomorrow. You've given a few opinions out there on Twitter. Tell us what you think he must do and what he must not do.
Well, let me just say, I can't remember a more bizarre run-in, if you like, to a budget in my lifetime. I mean, I would make no claim to be any great economist, but it seems fundamentally obvious to anyone, regardless of your political persuasion, that not the number one priority, the only issue for the government, the only priority for the government at this immediate point in the economic cycle is to safeguard and sustain the economic recovery. We are still a nation in lockdown. You and I have just been discussing what we think and hope will be a pathway out of lockdown. As the Prime Minister and his ministers have all said, there is, however, at this stage, no guarantee we will travel that pathway to the length and speed that we currently hope we will. We all know what the economic impact of lockdown has been on the country, on businesses. No one disputes that. So the idea that you would be even contemplating raising taxes in any significant way at this precise moment in time, I think is bizarre. Even the Labour Party, Keir Starmer has been, and I mean, he started flip-flopping a little bit, but certainly in the first part of, certainly last week and the first part of this week, he was being clear that he also opposes raising taxes at this point. So for Rishi Sunak to be even contemplating introducing the possibility of raising taxes in any significant way at the moment, I just don't understand it. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah. And it doesn't make sense economically.
But we do know, do we not, that there are people in government who are so out of touch with regular people and ordinary people on the street that they'll be sitting in their little offices, no doubt, or working from home in the Treasury Department saying, well, we're going to have to find some method of persuading people that we need to get this money back somehow. We can't just keep giving it away without showing them that in some way, shape or form, they'll have to wait for the payback.
But this is what I don't understand. I mean, that is a perfectly legitimate and fiscally responsible position to adopt. At some point, we are going to have to pay down the deficit, eradicate the deficit, and we are going to have to at some point start to pay down the debt. That's an economic reality. What I don't understand though is the timing. No one has yet explained to me why it is absolutely essential we begin to eradicate the deficit now at this point in time, rather than simply wait for a few months, see the extent to which we exit lockdown, see what the economic rebound is from that. Everybody seems to think there will be an economic rebound. The only question is how significant it will be. Once we can see the economy is recovering, if at that point you believe tax rises are an important component of the fiscal package necessary to eradicate the deficit and start to pay down the debt, fine. At that point, you can start to do that. But why put the recovery at risk before the recovery has even started? I just don't understand it. I haven't heard a rationale from anyone for that.
No, because there isn't one. I don't think anyone with any brains would try and make that case, because it's clearly damaging to people, as you say, to penalise them before anything's actually happened, before anything's actually recovered. But might he not do this kind of? Might he do his own version of a roadmap and say, starting in April of 2022, this is going to happen?
He may well do that. I mean, obviously, a lot of what it's not speculation. What people have been reporting is what they've been briefed by people within government. But obviously, we'll have to wait and see. There are two things that I don't understand, though. I mean, some people have been saying there's another possible explanation. He's been presenting this narrative: tax rises. If he stands up and doesn't raise taxes, everyone's going to be saying fantastic and patting Rishi on the back. There may be that logic. Another rationale has been that he needs to provide reassurance for the financial markets. But those two rationale don't align, because the markets have been seeing the sort of briefing we've been seeing. So if Rishi Sunak stands up in the budget tomorrow and doesn't raise taxes, then the financial markets will take a very clear signal from that as well. They will take the signal that Rishi Sunak wanted to raise taxes, but didn't have the political space to do so. So I don't understand the rationale. Again, as I say, I don't understand the rationale on that purely economic level. And the idea that we'll all say, oh, fantastic, we thought he was going to raise taxes, but he hasn't. Well, the only reason he'll get patted on the back for that is because he raised the prospect himself.
Right.
I mean, anybody seriously even thought anyone would be contemplating raising taxes at this moment in time in the midst of the coronavirus crisis.
I mean, to be honest, I'm quite surprised they're even having a budget. I mean, I know they've kicked it down the road already, but I'm surprised they haven't come out with some reason to postpone it again and wait until, we're in a clearer position to open up the economy, because he's obviously the guy that wants to open up the economy, but he's going to be slightly hamstrung because the schools go back next week, and what's going to happen. Boris Johnson's going to be up saying that, as he's already predicted, infection rates will rise, because that's an inevitability of doing anything which undoes the lockdown. So I'm slightly concerned that they might use the testing and the results of the testing of all the school kids twice a week, and they might turn that into some reason why we have to still go slowly.
This is probably where we disagree. I mean, I know from speaking to people in government, they are absolutely adamant that the timetable that Boris set out has to be adhered to at a minimum. That is the minimum pace at which unlocking should be proceeded with. That's the view of people in government. Now, as I say, I think the political reality we'll have to unlock sooner. I think that's where we'll end up. Yeah. But where I completely agree with you about this, why Rishi Sunak is trying to look into the crystal ball at the moment, whereas you say by June, July, we'll start to know, at least we'll know where we are in terms of the unlocking program. Several months after that, we'll be able to judge the extent to which the economy rebounds, and also, if it is required, some great sort of fiscal intervention is required from government after that, then there's absolutely nothing to stop him coming back and saying, right, we're going to have an emergency budget, and I'm going to introduce measure X, Y, and Z.
Right. Well, that would seem to be rational, wouldn't it? I mean, because in a way, there's a lot he can't do tomorrow because he simply doesn't know what the circumstances are going to be.
No, exactly. I mean, we don't know. I mean, also, we don't know how people are going to react to unlocking. My own view is when it unlocks, we will all be so relieved. We'll be storming out. We'll be storming out to the restaurants. We'll be storming out to the pubs. We'll be storming out to the shops. It'll be like the 1920s all over again. Everyone will be so relieved that lockdown is over. Well,
hopefully not with a crash at the end of the decade.
Well, exactly, or a war. But I mean, we don't know that. People could still be nervous. People could still be scared. People could be scared of the vaccine returning. People could be scared of lockdown returning. They could be thinking they need to. They could be scared of an economic impact again. People may like actually getting into the habit of staying home a bit more and saving money a bit more. We don't know any of this. So why roll the dice on it at this moment as I say, at this moment in the economic cycle? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it doesn't. Let me ask you about a tweet you put out a little bit earlier today about Joe Biden cancelling Dr. Seuss. Because I looked at it and I saw that he's now decided that Dr. Seuss is some kind of racist. I wasn't sure if you were in agreement with that or not, really.
No, I mean, I was because I, tweeted again about this whole Mr. Potato Head farrago
Yes.
from last week, and I was just pointing out, as somebody again who, despite what my critics may say, still has I still feel I have vestiges of liberalism lurking somewhere within me. Just pointing out that, if you want to cancel Mr. Potato Head, fine. If you want to cancel Dr. Seuss, fine. But understand there is going to be a reaction to that. There's going to be a backlash against that. And the people who cancelled Dr. Seuss and the people who cancelled Mr. Potato Head are the first people who turn around in shock and horror when a Donald Trump turns up or a Donald Trump gets elected. And I was merely pointing out, if you want to do this stuff, fine. But don't be surprised if there's a reaction. And I was saying, as somebody who's not a particularly big fan of Donald Trump, I'd rather stick with Mr. Potato Head and I'd rather stick with Dr. Seuss to make sure we don't have a return of Donald Trump.
And also, I think there is some rational reason as well for being critical of these kinds of decisions, because they're plainly idiotic. Mr. Potato Head is a toy character. He's in Toy Story. He can take his nose off and put it in his ear. Why are we even talking about what gender he is?
Well, I would actually go further. I would actually say that the key thing about Mr. Potato Head is Mr. Potato Head is Mr. Potato Head, right? So if it's, and this is what gets me, if you deem it is significant and important enough that you have to move against Mr. Potato Head, right? And you have to decide that he has to be part of a more gendering inclusive brand, fine. The fact that you think it's significant enough that you have to actually take the action, it shouldn't then surprise you if there are a large group of people who also think that it's significant enough that they want to. That there should be a reaction. Yeah. The same with Dr. Seuss. If you think Dr. Seuss is so culturally significant that he's significantly insufficiently inclusive that he has to be banned, fine. But you have to understand he is also therefore going to be culturally significant to another large group of people as well. So you can't have it both ways, and you can't simply say, oh, well, it's only a toy or it's only a children's book. If it matters enough to cancel them, it'll matter enough to people that they're not cancelled. Exactly.
But unfortunately, the arguments on both sides are so ridiculous that they shouldn't really even be being had. That's my point as well, that, the idea that you have to defend Mr. Potato Head's gender is kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, but also, I mean, the issue about Mr. Potato Head, though, was, this is the thing that gets me. It's quite clear it was a row that was engineered by the toy company who were trying to get some publicity for their new range. Or the point is, nobody needs all this at the moment. We've got enough going on. We need a Mr. Potato Head row, like we need a hole in the Mr. Potato Head. Right. No one needs it.
It's true. Very true. Dan, well, listen, I'm sure we'll speak again soon. Thanks very much indeed. Dan Hodges there from the Mail on Sunday, making absolute sense, actually, of this whole ridiculous nonsense about people like Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss, who apparently has now been cancelled, right, by Joe Biden. Boring Joe Biden, because apparently the Cat in the Hat might be a bit racist. Really? Are you serious?